G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic beginning to your holidays as well. It's exciting. Tomorrow is Christmas. Of course, it is Christmas Eve today. Santa has taken off and air traffic control has cleared him for landing. Now, I hope you have a fantastic Christmas tomorrow, and those who don't celebrate Christmas, well, I hope you have a fantastic day and some time with your family as well. Now, legends, I will see you tomorrow in a video, but I'm not sure what is going to happen yet. Last year, I ate one of the world's hottest peppers, but I lost a heap of following. For some reason, people were offended by that. But legends, there's a lot in this video today. There's a lot in it. It's going to be long. I apologize, but there are things in the beginning that are going to line up to things throughout and near the end of the video as well. And we need to talk about a large increase in propaganda because, well, we finally have an answer to why the deep state maps has not updated. I thought the boys just went a little bit hard at the Christmas party, had too many bevies. Seems like there has been a shutdown from the Ukrainian General Staff, and some are saying there's even threats of sending those guys to the bloody front line. Further, in this whole realm of informational space, Zelensky has accused the Slovakian Prime Minister, Robert Fico, who will share all of this throughout the video, that he in his talks with Putin, that he's there for personal gain. We also need to look at that the NATO secretary has said, Zelensky, you need to stop having a go at Olaf Scholz from Germany, the German Chancellor. They're supplying a hell of a lot of weapon systems, and at the end of the day, it's up to them if they send this system or not. So there are some bridges blazing and out of control going down at the moment. And we'll talk about all of this at length. But of course, as well, we're going to look at the maps. We need to look at Fico versus Zelensky. We need to look at planes and drones, deep state situation. We look at the Manpower frontline situation and some weapon systems, some geolocations, and some very large movements on the map too. Well more than 4 kilometers back from even where grey zone is sitting. But I want to start with that deep state and the hypocrisy and the messaging around this. And this is what I want to start with because I believe this applies to myself as well. And I was playing around with some words today, and this is what I came out with. When the truth is treated as propaganda, the lie it threatens must be monumental. And that if you are trying to tell the truth and you are pinned that that is propaganda, well, the truth must be even worse than what you are saying the situation there. And all I've ever done is try and tell the truth as I said. And I believe that the longer this goes on, and I've had some messages saying this, of people going, I thought you were just spreading bullshit, and I disagreed with you a year ago, and I'm coming back on. What does it mean when we see a huge increase in propaganda? I shared this weeks or a few months ago, and this is still incredibly relevant. A sudden increase in propaganda during a protracted and attritional war could reveal several potential dynamics at play, and I'll let you guys tick some boxes in this. Morale management. The side ramping up propaganda may be attempting to bolster its own population's morale, particularly if the war's toll is leading to fatigue or disillusionment. 2, the perception of weakness. Increased focus on propaganda might signal that the side is experiencing setbacks or vulnerabilities. Heightened messaging could be a compensatory measure to mask losses, challenges, or declining capacity. 3, shaping international opinion. Maybe trying to counteract narratives from the opponent or secure more international support, or shutting down speech that may run against narrative. Again, like my quote was in the beginning. Worse than what is being said. Preemptive justification. Propaganda surge might indicate preparation for a significant action, escalation, retreat, or controversial tactics. Again, I have said nearing the end of the war, the risk, as I see it, for massive false flag events that can spiral out of control globally massively increases near the end. 5, targeting opponents' morale. Propaganda aimed at opposing side may signal attempts to exploit weaknesses such as political divisions or war fatigue. Shifts in strategy. Pivot to heavy propaganda could reflect a broader strategic shift where psychological operations are becoming a central aspect of their war effort. Escalation or desperation. If the propaganda becomes markedly extreme or apocalyptic, it could suggest desperation. This might be the final push, rally all resources, or intimidate opponents into negotiations. Resource allocation indicators. A well-coordinated propaganda campaign may indicate that resources are being funneled into informational warfare, suggesting either confidence in its effectiveness or lack of capacity to escalate through other means, military hardware or troops. Now, I myself, of the 8 here, there are several that absolutely stand out to me as we're seeing this increase in propaganda. But let's look at what has been said to me months ago, and I believe I shared this. If I didn't, it's not the only one like this from very trusted, experienced guys who I know, talking about what I report. I dare say you'll get a warning someday from someone you can't see or reply to. And I have had people who share some information with me warn me about similar like this. But deep state, what has happened here? Well, firstly, let's look at a controversial MP, Murray Buzlov, I can't pronounce it, has said this is the first, and then I looked on deep state and went, this is true. Attention, instead of stabilising an offence, Syrians launched an attack on the deep state team, the last bastion of more or less adequate information about the front line. Mobilisation of the deep state team in the infantry, there are no people, no problem. So saying that there was a threat of mobilising those in the deep state team. Appeal to the SBU and law enforcement agencies to disclose information. There is no point in playing with Oz in here. All sorts of discrediting the project. General Staff has its own truth and controlled situation. They want to control it, not have someone else doing it. Remember, deep state came under the MOD at one point, and I heavily criticised that. And now look at the situation from here. Closing the project, why are these maps enough false reports? We have all known deep state since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Every day is almost the only source to understand what is happening, both for civilians and even for the military. The attack on the starters of the project, another dimension of their complete backwardness and evidence. We really found ourselves hostage to the Soviet, and this word means idiot. That is the same word that Zelensky called Putin the other day. I ask all those who can care help the Auslan community of Ukraine so that the generals can choke. Now, let's look at what deep state has said. Always worked and made maximum efforts of victory and to help our fighters and our country. I agree with that from deep state. That is why we have an iron reputation, the most valuable trust among society, and the most importantly among the military. That is why we're the most famous map of the Russian-Ukrainian war in Ukraine and of the world. Unfortunately, not all commanders-in-chiefs like the truth, and that's a shame. Back to my quote in the beginning. We thank everyone endlessly for their support. A huge number of people write and call us. This support is extremely great and gives us strength and inspiration. You're incredible. We work for victory and we will not give up. I hope that deep state some way can get back up and running, even if that means moving out of Ukraine to report from there. But I think that would be more telling than everything else as well. And the hypocrisy in this is out of this world, saying that this is exactly what Ukraine is fighting against. Media shutdowns, fake narratives, this and that, and pro-Ukrainian accounts, NAFO accounts should be absolutely livid about this happening, because it's exactly what you accuse the Russians of doing, happening internally to deep state, who supply a hell of a lot of great information and call out the realities when it needs to be called out. Again, bringing sunlight to a hard topic is the way to fix that. And now it's just being shut down. And furthermore, we see in Ukraine intimidation of media with intelligence services, both domestic and international media. That is well reported and documented as well. Now we see shutting down maps. These maps, deep state has an ultra pro-Ukraine view, but they're reporting too much of the truth. And this goes into this absolute spiral that it's like anyone who questions anything is then a pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin puppet. Therefore, you're just in this authoritarian informational sphere. Opposing views are so important because it calls out the BS. And this is a huge loss in the informational space. And I hope deep state can get back on their feet. But we are seeing the true colours of how things in Ukraine work. This whole narrative that Ukraine is a free, democratic, Denmark-style country, I've been pushing back on this for years. It's starting to show itself. And I've said multiple times, I love Ukraine, I love the people. But to act as if those problems don't exist, you know what that does? It exacerbates those fucking problems and makes it worse. It makes EU further away, NATO further away, and victory significantly further away. And in my opinion, it's those narratives and those ideals that have come in because people won't look at things realistically that has actually allowed victory for Ukraine to slip through the fingers. Poor command, poor leadership has led to poor mobilisation. Mobilisation has led to less arms, and it starts there, that no one's willing to bring sunlight to these problems. And this is starting to show itself. Not fixing this has been Zelensky's biggest blunder. It limits and destroys internal confidence, but therefore destroys manpower. And as we are seeing that now state propaganda is beginning to collapse and people are questioning that more and now are moving on to other areas. And what I have been saying again and again for months is as we near the end, whether that is in a week, whether that's in a month, however, or it's in a decade, as we near the end, things are going to get more wild and there's going to be a massive increase in propaganda, either readying for attacks, whether maybe even false flags, limiting media, or again, this could be in preparation as well for negotiations. And we need to look at Robert Fico, but we'll look at that later on. I want to look at a few reactions to this deep state thing. So Dennis says here, not the Dennis, another Dennis, given that Western media and society has basically shut off Russian media, they are going to put all their resources into PR. Anybody who contradicts them will be a Russian bot or something. And that last line is incredibly true. If you say, but this happened, even if you're geolocated, even if you can show evidence. No, remember, that MP had to apologise for saying that Ukraine had changed some street names. That's true. Like, that is true. Have some statues and whatever and memorials been pulled down. That is also true. But you contradict it, even if you're right, it's propaganda. And that is exactly what I said in the beginning. Dragon says, nothing says we're winning more than shutting down the only decent, somehow reliable source of updates. It's often the case that the winning side needs to shut down any opposition. Exactly so, mate. Tyler says it seems like a key turning point in the propaganda, the possible state of attrition, if they're shutting it down now. Again, I think this is painting things that it's worse than people are thinking. And this is what Deep State has written. He hasn't posted in a couple of days. He's been incredibly busy. Syriac does a fantastic job. Thank you for your patience. There'll be several posts updating which we're going to go through, but don't worry, I won't be shut down. I won't be drafted into the war. Remember, that was what people are saying, is that there was a threat of being drafted if there's not a shut down. This is not a good look. And people should be upset about this. I'm upset about Deep State, and I disagree with them way more than a lot of other people. This page here says shutting down Deep State would have a mixed effect on the Ukrainian war effort. He's a breakdown 40-60 against the decision based on my input. He says potential benefits is enhanced security, reduced risk of operational leaks. I think this is irrelevant with Russia and China having satellites everywhere, and the AusInt capture through social media is just massive. I'm not saying that is completely nothing, but I think it's more like 1 or 2% rather than 40%. That's my opinion. Message control ensures strategic narratives dominate, critical to modern warfare. This is, I get it, that this is the reason that you can paint your own narrative, but why is it being done now? Especially when Deep State, they towed that narrative, they continue to tow that narrative, but why now? What is that showing us? Potential harms. Now, I believe this is probably 95 harm, 5 benefit-ish. 1, loss of transparency. Damages trust government messaging, and this is from the World Bank Transparency Study. Therefore, this has problems in manpower. It means then things like corruption can thrive. 2, weakened open source intelligence collaboration. Public platforms have revealed troop movements and disinformation. These have been sometimes before even closed information about, hey, there's Russian guys here or this or that. Absolutely. 3, reduced morale. Already, Ukraine has a morale crisis. What did I show you before in the reasons for increased propaganda in a protracted attritional war? Trying to fix morale. We get it. Citizen engagement boosts resilience and unity. So people will maybe just not look at anything, or they'll change to another one. Conclusion, balancing security and transparency is key. Full shutdowns could do more harm than good. A moderated approach may be more effective. And in modern warfare, there is a difficulty between OPSEC, operational security, and open source intelligence. With geolocations being so good, this and that, that's something that I take in consideration every time I go somewhere and film, and it's incredibly difficult to film something and go, well, how's that going to be seen? But shutting down any views, especially opposing views, or even views on your side that aren't extreme enough on your side, real concern. And Tataragami UA says this: the issue with the narrative question is that the people won't return to official sources. They'll simply turn to alternative ones, some of which may even be pro-Russian. Again, do you really think that now people who have lost Deep State are going to go to official sources seeing what has happened? They're going to go to different ones. And they could be on the neutral or pro-Russian side, as the threshold for that is 0. But this is what I've said, that they should be livid about this happening, because this is exactly what is claimed to be fought against. People prefer deep state over official sources because the trust to official sources isn't that high. And this has just absolutely tanked any of that trust in official sources even further, which is way, way worse. And I think that Makarivka, this was the final nail in the coffin for deep state. So here's Ukraine in the center. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, we come down into Makarivka Blahatny area. Now, of course, these areas, especially the Robotny, these are very sensitive because this is where Ukraine's failed 23 counteroffensive was. So they haven't been updating Robotny anywhere near where the movements and geolocations actually are, sometimes being 6 to 8 months behind, and there has been reluctance to update in this sector as well. Of course, very sensitive. But they showed yesterday that Makarivka has been encircled here. Now, Deep State, Syriac, he paints a whole different story again. That he says, no, this whole area has just come under control. This has collapsed. As I've said, there's either troops surrounded or not. The Ukrainian map is showing us that there's troops surrounded, and the neutral map of Syriac, he is showing that the Ukrainians have withdrawn and closed up in here. Now, remember what I said in the beginning? When the truth is treated as propaganda, the lie it threatens must be monumental. Keep that in mind for this region. Syriac says it's gone. Deep State says it's surrounded, and then we see this. Reports that Ukrainian forces being surrounded in Makarivka near Velika Novosilka are false, says the Kotsia Operational Strategic Grouping. Claims of encirclement are unverified and based on misinterpreted data by observers and independent analysts. So we dig the final nail in the coffin for Deep State. But I go back to, well, what is the situation? Why is that then so sensitive? But we have another geolocation in this area, but not confirming or denying that surround. We see just down on the corner here in Makarivka itself that there are then Russians in here, seen by then raising this flag on a destroyed building. So there's definitely advancement into there. And shit, I'm more leaning towards, with the sensitivity around this, that there may actually be a surrounding in there. Of course, Noel reports the map didn't show it anywhere near either of those two. So this is why I show you multiple maps. You can make up your mind on things. Now, let's have a look at some bits that I find interesting today. UAC posted this on their Telegram. Manufacturing delivered next batch of operational tactical aviation to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Su-34s and Su-57s. Now, as I always do, because they always say batch, I count the aircraft in the video. And in the video, I can see one Su-57 and one Su-34. And what I will say is this isn't only meeting a replacement, this is exceeding replacement. It's been a very long time since a fighter aircraft, especially a bomber like a Su-34, the most important ones for the Russian aerospatial forces, has been taken down by Ukrainian air defense or air-to-air. It's been a very long time since that. So they're exceeding replacement rate at this point. But people say it's a batch of 2 each. Again, I don't believe anything except if I see it, and what I see is one of each in this. Now, Zelensky and Scholz, that is being tested. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that he considered that sometimes harsh criticism of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to be unjustified. Now, I've often told Zelensky that he should stop criticising Olaf Scholz because I think it is unfair. Germany has supplied the most amount of systems to Ukraine other than the US. It is unfair. And furthermore, Germany has been, other than Ukraine, the most affected country by this war, with Ukrainian agents taking out the Nord Stream, wiping billions of dollars out of the German economy and having to be backfilled by much, much more expensive gas. So, yeah. Rutte said that he, unlike Scholz, would supply Ukraine with Taurus cruise missile systems. Well, I would, but in general, we know that such capabilities are very important for Ukraine, adding that it was not up to him to decide what allies should deliver. But a question, does Zelensky know the veto powers that Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, and the US hold in certain things? Seems to be the bridges on fire currently. Now, we see some fantastic work here in Kurakhove, which I'll show you in a bit. These are Ukrainian operators here, some of which have gone out without weapon systems. So you are faster. If you've ever ran with a rifle, you know it's a pain in the arse. So they've run out in here basically clean skin other than their personal protective equipment to then rescue a Ukrainian soldier here and a second soldier here who have been wounded and then drag these guys back to safety. Fantastic teamwork, fantastic movement on the ground. Props to all those guys. I have been saying that one of the biggest things making a big effect on the front line currently is Russian fiber optic drones, and that Ukraine need to get those in place now. Ukraine needs to stay technologically ahead because they will never be numerically ahead. Does that make sense? And this is said to be a 13-inch, I measured it myself, had to fold it in half, quad rotor drone here, fibre optically controlled, said to have 15 kilometres of fibre optic spool. We will see. I'm sure we'll get some videos. Now, of course, an Aussie prisoner of war has been taken by the Russian forces. Now, what I should have said yesterday, and I thought about it, I just didn't say anything, but I should have, is said, I have gone somewhere before in both in uniform and out of uniform in countries at war. Now, risks of going to these countries and risks of especially fighting is wounded, dead, or captured. And that is accepted by all soldiers. And if it isn't accepted, well, that should be. So this guy, it sucks being captured, but he should have accepted that if I'm going to fight here and if I lose my life, I get wounded or I get captured, that is part of the price we pay of doing a job like this. So we will see. I'm not sure exactly how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Australia is going to deal with this, because Russia has said that Australia is an unfriendly country to Russia. Of course, though, Mr. Aussie Cossack has put up his hand and said, you can swap me back. If Aussie Cossack proves himself to be a useful idiot in terms of a possibility for a prisoner swap, and that is what the government to consider it as looks to free Oscar Jenkins from Russian custody. This is from our shadow Foreign Affairs Minister. So I guess that offer is there. It'll be very interesting to see if that happens. I think as far as propaganda, it's more useful for Aussie Cossack to be in Australia for the Russians rather than this. So I don't know if there'll be, if that bait will be taken. Again, we know the exchange rate is God of War, Lord of War, whatever they used to call him, for WNBA player. That's the exchange rate. So for a soldier, I guess we will see. Now, should I talk about manpower, frontline situation, or maps? Let's look at the maps, then the manpower frontline, because I know that it might make some of you stick around, but I should do it the other way. It would be better the other way, but I don't want people to ditch me. So let's talk about, ignore the red check on this map because this map hasn't been updated, but let's talk about Toretsk, and then we'll talk about Kherson. Now, Toretsk here hasn't been updated, but we've got an update from a couple of days back. This tells a vastly different bloody story. Let's look at Suryak. Sorry, wrong one. Suryak map here. Toretsk, movements way out this road here. Leonidivka is this red dot, well further out than that, and movement right where this Sherbingivka starts to head back to the west. So what do we know about this? Well, this is from a Ukrainian drone. We see drones attacking Russian armoured columns and taking losses here. That said, it seems like time and time again, there are losses, but attritional grinding warfare is moving. And this is telling. Where exactly was that? Right about here, close enough to it. 3.1 kilometres from even where the red zone is shown in Toretsk, well outside the grey, kilometres behind, and 4.7, close enough to 5 kilometres behind then on the south. So potentially a very large advancement there if the Russian forces were able to get an area and dig into positions there. They don't need to dig in because they'll be taking up already made positions. That's a large advancement there. Now, what I've speculated about is that there's been again and again that Russia is going to have a huge assault on Zap. And I've said it doesn't make sense for a south to north assault unless Ukraine is way more degraded in this sector than we thought, and that could be a possibility, it doesn't make sense because this is the most fortified area. The most sense is to get these areas of Pokrovsk Kurakhove and then do an east to west attack, westerly attack towards Zap, because it negates, basically can get in behind some of those defensive works, or if you hit them side on, they're going to be nowhere near as efficient or as effective. So this maybe move, or push through maybe in Otaki. We will see. But I also speculated the other day, Russia is massively increasing attacks into Kherson, especially around Antonivka. And there's said to be tens of thousands of Russian forces in here for the attack into Zap. Could it not be here? Could it be across to Kherson? And could Russians want to get some level of foothold on the right bank by any size? Because if there's then negotiations, as much as the Ukrainians don't want the Russians on the left bank, they sure as shit don't want them on the right bank. The right bank is far more important for especially negotiations, so we will see. But let's talk about Kherson and what Noel Reports has said in this. Moscow plans a new offensive in Zaporizhia and Kherson, targeting the new right bank region. This is from RBC Ukraine. Russia may focus on these areas on Zap, intensifying efforts near Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson, like I have shown you. The operation, led by Airborne Commander Mikhail Teplinsky, reportedly involves 4,000 troops, including elite airborne and marine units. This is what we have been saying about attritional warfare. You need professional army, high army, low army. And that professional full-time units, they capture area, and then the low-level guys, they hold the area. And the low-level mobilized guys, they get experience that way and eventually become more of the professional forces. We talked about it yesterday, I've talked about it well before, but this does go in line with then the Brusilov offensives that was developed in the early 20th century. That the offensive, named after the Russian general here, Alexei Brusilov, offensive attack on various points of the enemy's entrenched lines, which was qualified by the number of troops available for a breakthrough of numerous breakthroughs at many given points, as well as immediate shock value. So this is what we speak about, that you don't have one big decisive push through and getting behind, that you have attacks hitting everywhere. And this is exactly what I believe the Russians are doing, keeping the Ukrainians from able to, because if you push in one area, then your adversary, they can move everything to that area to stop you. But if you push on more and more fronts, especially if you are numerically superior in shells and men and tanks and armoured vehicles, there you can push on those, and the other side is never going to have enough to do this. And this is the big threat, is if the Russians can cross into Kherson, can push further into Zap and Kursk and areas, it's exactly in line with that. But of course, the biggest friction point on that is logistics. It really, really challenges your logistics and will open up many more targets for things like ATACMS and whatever. But as you're going to see, even people from air defense are being moved now to the infantry. It's not propaganda. It's not a rumor. It's not nice, but it is true. So let's have a look at some other areas. So we'll come down Pokrovsk Frontline in here. Again, we're going to be doing a lot of reliance on Syriac maps until I can find a reasonable alternative. So we have where the train line is through here in Shevchenko-Pishyani region. Situated Pokrovsk front. Last 2 days, Russian army entered the first houses of these areas. In addition, Russian forces made new advances south of Zeleny towards Vokove. So we have then, of course, where we see Pishyani in here, further movements up, as well as Zeleny in here. These areas are getting advanced on, if not coming under control, and far more out towards Solone as well. Again, it's so good to compare maps, but it's sort of thrown a spanner in the works. So let's go to Bakhmut Chasiv Yar front line in here, and we can see that there is a Russian advancement in the center here. Of course, Ukraine pushed back the Russians in what was this again? But in the warehouse sector in here, Ukraine had a successful offensive, but now it looks like Russia is trying to envelop this. Let's move up into the northeastern corner, and we're calling this just the Pashan front, but you have Lozova in here. This is an incredibly important area, but the logistics was cut, and in here, that's Zarizove is said to be coming under 70% control by the Russian forces, and then we see Russia is throwing a lot at Kursk to try and push back the Ukrainians in this sector, but Ukraine is pushing a lot of man-machine into here to try and continue to maintain and hold this sector, which, interesting. I don't get it. I don't get this sector, but regardless, we will go With it, we can see Russian army recapture the village of Grugovki, advanced north of Leonidovo, approaching these areas from the west. So where we need to just move down into is it's not really shown, but this is Leonidovo, these areas that are coming up on control and where we see those tree lines coming under control. So this sector in through here is where we're talking about. Again, we'll wait on these maps. Noah reports did a great job when the Ukrainians were on advancement through here, but everyone's ignoring now that the Russians are on the advancement back. Now, we need to talk manpower situation that links into the maps before we talk about FICO. So, manpower situation. Actually, let's start with Zelensky's frontline situation. We must do our best to force Russia to make real peace and take responsibility for everything it has done as soon as possible. I thank everyone who's helping us do this. Except, mate, you are in control of command, corruption, and manpower, which are the biggest problems. Or you're the only ones to force Russia to do this by weapons and sanctions, because none of that is being fixed, and this can be fixed. It's been years, and people are starting to see more and more. Why is this not being fixed, and why hasn't it been fixed? Commander-in-Chief Shersky reported the front line in areas of Kursk operation. There were already 3,000 wounded and killed North Korean soldiers in the Kursk region. Remember any numbers? No. Russia is simply disposing of them in assaults, basically saying they're being used in meat assaults and 3,000 are being killed or wounded. Again, as far as concrete evidence of this, there's still none. Why Koreans fight for Putin is a question no normal person on earth can answer. I'm a normal person. Propaganda and allies right there. Why the Koreans should fight for Putin is a question. Bloody blew my mind. But unfortunately, the world is doing almost nothing to counter criminal collaboration between Russia and North Korea. Sanctions on them both, but the problem is the longer sanctions are on, the less effective they are, because you find other markets in each other or with China too. Although the threat is to every state, including those near the Korean Peninsula, to China, to others, and the states in our region and elsewhere in the world. So saying that this is a world problem here. The fact that Moscow is transferring military technologies to North Korea and helping Pyongyang regime to abuse people and keep part of the Korean peoples as slaves to one family. When this happens, you realize that the words of those who call on Russia to not expand the war and not to aggravate the situation are not worth much. So the words of those who call on Russia not to expand the war and not to aggravate the situation, he's saying that you guys aren't worth much. Well, Trump is doing that, who is the leader of the most powerful country in the world too. So is China. Moscow does not understand words but must feel strength. Peace through strength is possible. Again, it is, but not without fixing command, corruption, and manpower, which are not mutually exclusive. It's all in one. And that is being ignored, and it's being pushed on. No, we need the US to send more, rather than we need to mobilise guys, have the front, and have victories on the front line. The US is literally saying, if you send us men, we'll train them, arm them, and send them back. And somehow it's not happening. And this was from The Guardian today. President Volodymyr Zelensky has resisted public calls from the Biden administration to lower the age at which men can be mobilised from 25, where it currently stands, to 18, citing the sensitivities of younger men to fight in a society that already faces demographic crisis. But with Russia continuing to find fresh recruits for its growing advances, the army is struggling to find enough people to fill the gaps at the front. A series of interviews with Ukrainian officers who spoke anonymously, given the sensitivity of the issue, paint a worrying picture for Ukraine's war effort. Again, these guys speaking anonymously tells you a lot. Now, one of these guys has said the people we get now are not like the people who were there in the beginning of the war. Remember, they were volunteers and they were highly motivated. Currently deployed 114th Territorial Defence Brigade, stationed in various hotspots over the last 2 years, saying recently we received 90 people, but only 24 of them were ready to move to the positions. The rest were old, sick, or alcoholics. A month ago, we were walking around Kyiv and Dnipro, and now they're in the trench and can barely hold a weapon, poorly trained and poorly equipped, who will not survive on the front line. And if they don't survive on the front line, therefore you lose, experience is not gained, and you start losing more and more and more. Two sources in air defence told The Guardian the deficit at the front has become so acute that the General Staff has ordered already depleted air defence units to free up more men to send to the front as infantry. It's reaching a critical level where we can't be sure that air defence can function properly, saying he had been prompted to speak out by a fear that the situation was at risk to Ukrainians' security. So if the air defence isn't there, more missiles are going to start getting through, which I believe we are seeing. Well, we've seen Iskander's hit in Kyiv, and typically Iskanders wouldn't have as much luck there as hypersonics due to how hard they are to hit. So I guess we're seeing this. These people knew how air defence works. Some had been trained in the West and had real skills. Now they're sent to the front to fight, for which they have no training. So Western trained air defence is going to the front line with no infantry training. Commanders can use orders to send soldiers they do not like to the front as punishment. There is also fear that equipped with sensitive knowledge about Ukrainian air defense positions and tactics, there is a risk these soldiers giving up important information if they are captured by Russians at their front. As you can see, cracks aren't starting to appear. Cracks are becoming fucking crevasses. Last month, Maria Brazulia, who we spoke about before, outspoken and controversial MP, she claimed on Telegram that air defense was being transferred to the infantry, and many people said this was just propaganda, but we had seen a lowering success rate, I believe, in shooting down missiles. Yuri Inhut, spokesman for Air Defence Forces, confirmed at the time the transfers were taking place and that they were painful, but he denied it was affecting shoot-down rates. Okay. The Guardian spoke with the increasing demands for transfers and making it hard to run air defence units properly, because it is high level, high skill. This has been going on for a year, but it's been getting worse and worse. I'm already down to less than half. In recent days, the commission came and they want dozens more. I'm left with those aged 50 plus and injured people. It's impossible to run things like this. Well, the first month of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 22 saw lines of Ukrainians ready to volunteer. Hundreds of thousands of people have willingly gone to the front since mobilisation has been a major challenge for Kyiv in the past year, with squads of recruitment officers roaming the streets and handing out call-up papers. Men of conscription age have been barred from leaving the country since the start of the invasion, and I cannot believe the more liberal politicians are not saying that's fucked. And I've never seen any feminist bring this up. Most Ukrainians understand the need for mobilisation, but the policy is unpopular on a personal level, and the recruiting squads often face anger and abuse as they look for conscripts. Again, there has been a lot of these recruiting squads and in the officers charged and accused of torture and murder of mobilised guys. And there is no law on rotation or demobilisation that's having a massive effect on this, about these laws. That is well within the realm of the leader, Zelensky, as well as throwing an election, is as well, and not being done. I think we'll look back on this and go, were people fucking jeopardising things? And a telling sign of changing attitudes in the country, a poll by Kyiv-based Ruzmankov Centre over the summer found that 46% of respondents agreed that there was no shame in evading military service, while only 29% disagreed. Our last slide here. The personnel shortage has soured relationships between Kyiv and Washington over the recent months, same as with Hungary and, of course, Slovakia and Germany too. This could be a big problem if you want to join NATO in the EU. Officials in the Biden administration felt irritated that Zelensky and other officials frequently demanded more weapons, but were unable to mobilise the requisite power to fill the ranks. Manpower is the most vital need, says White House National Security spokesperson Sean Savant in his statement. We're also ready to ramp up our training capacity if they take appropriate steps to fill out their ranks. The US is openly, publicly saying, send us guys, we'll train them and give them kit, and they aren't being sent. Ukrainian officials felt public calls by the US to lower mobilisation age to 18 was insensitive and inappropriate. Ukraine expanded its mobilisation drive in April, lowering it, but it hasn't backfilled it, and it's not meeting replacement. But a majority of Ukrainians, even those at the front, are wary of lowering it further, citing the need to protect the younger generation. And I understand that. But the question needs to be asked then, is the war existential or not? Because if the war is existential, if you don't win, therefore it is existential, the state will not exist, then you'd have no problem mobilising these guys. This is the manpower paradox. If you don't, the state, it's existential. And if you do, you're saying that it is then existential because you're going to lose the younger generation. That's the paradox, which does not make sense. And that's not mutually exclusive. That it's one or the other. Many soldiers say that the way to boost mobilisation rates is not by lowering the call-up age, but offering better incentives and more training. And I believe victories on the front line. And the more guys you get, the more you'll get. The worse it gets, the worse it gets. Anyway, it's not about age, really. They need good conditions and motivation, demobilisation, rotation, said the soldier from the 114th. 18-year-olds are still children. Maybe they could lower it to 23 if necessary, but there are still enough people in Kyiv who could be mobilised but don't want to go. And you understand this when you see. And I don't think there's any incentivisation in the world that would make me want to experience the horrors here as a soldier if I'm not receiving that much training. And I've received years and years of training, and even I'm like, holy fuck, and these guys are not going to get anything. So the motivated guys are gone. And the more things go well for Russia, on the front line, the more motivation there's actually going to be. Now let's talk about Fico, Robert Fico, of course, Prime Minister of Slovakia, and Zelensky. Now what I will say in this is no one in the Western world is allowed to be a nationalist, except for if you're in Ukraine. You can even have historical, horrific views, and it's fully accepted. Fico, Slovakia, Orban from Hungary, these are democratically elected leaders by more conservative countries. And I believe that these guys, they're not lining up with the Putin. They're looking inwardly, and they're seeing long-term what is the best for their country and their people. And this concept of looking inwardly, not outward, is very foreign in the current Western world order. This is why Trump is so polarizing. Don't forget that Fico and Trump have both had attempts on their lives with people shooting at them. And I think that Trump, Fico, Orban, the most polarizing figures here in the West, for the topic we're speaking of, they're seeing the reality of this war through NATO's failures to arm Ukraine, as well as Ukraine's failures to improve the manpower situation at the front line. But they're seeing these failures by NATO and by Ukraine here, that the war has crossed an event horizon, and that a Russian victory or massive power in negotiations has crossed that and is inevitable, and that there will be inevitably huge debts, massive losses, and higher goods in Europe with maybe the same outcome. I think that's how they're seeing it. They're going, this is the reality. They've accepted their belief here and going, therefore we need to look what's best long term here, rather than just having way more losses, way more expense of everything down the line for potentially the same outcome, and just drawing it longer and longer. Although Zelensky will say that if you say that, you don't mean much. And again, this leads to what I'm going to call Europe's internal Cold War, which I think will be much more obvious in coming years. But the ones to benefit the most will be Putin and then Xi Jinping, or whoever the leaders are at the time. That this internal Cold War will be between progressive liberalism and conservative traditionalism. And this polarization between Western, Central, and Eastern Europe, or between the powers that be in those countries, the governments, and the people. And this is what poses the biggest threat to the West. It's not Russia's military hardware or China's. It's so much division internally and ideology that's the threat. And this woke liberal agenda, for want of a better term, is not being accepted by people and nations. So the people there may be not accepting this. So say, let's the people in Slovakia or Hungary or whatever don't accept this. Those nations say, we don't really see eye to eye with these other nations within our spheres of economic and military influence, say NATO, EU. But in the day and age, you can't be a completely sovereign country because no one has the military power. You need to be part of something, and that these nations could float more into the sphere of influence of Russia. I've always said Russia's threat to NATO is not militarily, and I don't give a fuck what the leader of NATO, Mark Rutte, says. Russia's threat to NATO is not military, and I don't believe it ever has been military. It is ideology. I believe that was the real Soviet threat to the US as well. Ideologically threat, not military. And it's not that the Russian ideology has become attractive for a lot of people. I think it's that the Western ideology, what's being pinned, that you see upheld by some of these leaders, has become disgusting for many people, voters and leaders, that there's a rejection of that too. So I don't believe people are being attracted to that, but I believe people saying, what's happening in our realm is just not lining up with what I hold dear. Now, I don't see this as much because I'm not religious, but if I was religious, I think I'd even have a larger stand on that too, more towards conservative. So that's what I believe the big threat is in here. I think the biggest threat to the West and the biggest benefit to Russia is this division that is happening in politics and ideology, this movement, the rejection of that, and maybe seeking other ways. And I've said, depending how this war ends and how politics move forward, the makeup of Europe could look very, very different without a single shot being fired. So let's look at then Robert Fico. He says, today I met with the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, in Moscow. I'd like to remind you that I promote sovereign politics of all four parties. Top EU officials were informed about my journey and its purpose on Friday. My meeting today was a reaction to Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, who answered my personal question on Thursday in Brussels about against the transit of gas through Ukraine to our territory. Remember, there is gas lines going through Ukraine that are still flowing into Slovakia, and those are being cut off by Ukraine. The Ukrainian president is also in favour of sanctions against Russian nuclear program. With such attitudes, Slovakia financially damages and endangers the production of electricity in nuclear power plants in Slovakia, which is unacceptable. Russian President Vladimir Putin confirmed the Russian Federation readiness to continue supplying gas to the West and to Slovakia in view of Ukrainian president's stance after the 1st of January 2025. It's almost impossible. In a long conversation with Putin, we exchanged views on the military situation in Ukraine and the possibility of an early peaceful end to the war and to the mutual relations between then Slovakia and the Russian Federation, which I intend to standardise. Activities related to this will help the 80th anniversary of World War II and the victory over fascism, where a decisive role was played by the Russians, Belarusians, Ukrainians, again, all countries, as he says, in the former USSR, the Soviet Union. They did play the decisive role in World War II, even if people don't like to admit it. And then we, of course, swung into the Cold War. Zelensky has come out swinging to this. There have been many questions from journalists today about Fico's trip to Moscow. In fact, after a conversation in Brussels, in the presence of all European leaders, nothing surprises me anymore. We are fighting for our lives. We'll then fix existential threats. That can fix this, fix command, fix corruption, fix mobilization, and in that order, probably years ago, but I believe Zelensky really approached and said, we need help from the US doing this. It's going to save money and increase our chance at victory. It would be done, but there is unbelievable foot drag on this, and I question why. Fico is fighting for money, and it's unlikely that money is for Slovakia. Shadow agreements with Putin are either a trade of state interests or working for personal gain. So he's saying that the money that Fico is fighting for is not for Slovakia, that it's for himself. That is a very, very big call, seeing some members of the cabinet on the other side here of the government who have been done for corruption of millions. That's a big thing for all. Slovakia, who of course has a lot of control for EU NATO entry, as well as Hungary. We offered him solutions regarding potential compensation for Slovaks and Slovaks specifically for losses from Russia's transit. We have heard $500 million or euros, but I haven't seen anything of that confirmed, as well as alternatives for transit and other gas not Russian. It's probably likely to cost a lot more than that long term. At the request of the European Commission, we are ready to do this. Fico did not want compensation for the Slovaks. He does not want to cooperate with the European Commission. For some reason, he finds Moscow more profitable. It may not be more profitable. It may be saving a lot more money there too. Because I think, like I said in the beginning, I think Fico has said this war's ending. He thinks it's crossed an event horizon and all of it is pointing towards this. It's going there anyway. It's just going to be increased suffering if it continues. But it's going to increase our price of things massively. Everyone in Europe understands why. There's no one who doesn't. This is a difficult one when that has been flowing through by the time this goes through, 2 years and 11 months of war, that not being stopped on that date. That should have probably been stopped day one, but it has continued, but it's going to rub just like the gas Nord Stream rubbed a lot of Germans the wrong way. This could rub a lot of people in Eastern Europe absolutely the long way. And I believe the worst thing that Zelensky can do nearing the end of this is put a lot of leaders on then or burn bridges between himself and those leaders in Washington, in Eastern Europe. And we saw that with the Minister of Defense from Poland going, why the fuck are there UAP flags on vehicles? We see what is launched towards Fico and the claims that Fico is getting rich off this. I'm sure that doesn't happen with any other money and anywhere else. And it's fucking terrible if that is happening. I would call that out too. But it's glass houses with stones being thrown. So, again, I think, like I said, things get messy towards the end and things are getting fucking messy. So, again, we will see. But my biggest point in all of this is with this, I don't see why the Russian commanders at this point would go, yeah, things are getting bad. We would negotiate on fair, reasonable terms at this point. I don't believe so at all. I think the Russians' request for the 4 oblasts and Crimea, I think that has gone. I think they would request far more than that, or they're just going to continue, and the trajectory is going to, it's going to be higher cost, but what comes back to them could be far, far higher. So again, we will see. Maybe I'll be surprised and maybe I'll be eating my words, but we will report on the truth as we see it as we go. Legends. Remember, when the truth is treated as propaganda, the lie it threatens must be monumental. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.